The heavy glass door of the penthouse office on the 95th floor of the Croft Enterprises Tower did an admirable job of muffling the sounds from within, but it couldn't contain them completely. A sharp, ugly crack, followed by a woman's brief, strangled cry, made Clara Vance stop her cleaning cart dead in the vast, silent hallway. She stood perfectly still, a ghost in a gray smock, every muscle in her body coiled tight as a spring. Her eyes, the only part of her that betrayed the placid exterior she had so carefully cultivated, were fixed on the imposing entryway. She was just a maid, paid to erase the day's smudges and messes, to be an invisible presence after the titans of industry had gone home. But the woman she used to be, the one she had buried under 5 years of quiet anonymity, was screaming at her to move, to act, to intervene. Before the war in her mind could reach a conclusion, the door was pulled open just enough for a small body to slip through. A little girl, no older than 7, with wide, terrified eyes and hair the color of spun gold, stumbled into the hall. Her small chest was heaving with silent, desperate sobs. She saw Clara standing there, a shadow with a rolling cart of cleaning supplies. And she ran. She didn't scream. Her terror was too profound, too suffocating for that. She launched herself forward and grabbed the rough fabric of Clara's work pants with 2 small, trembling hands. She looked up, her face a pale oval of desperation, and delivered the words that shattered Clara's quiet life forever. "They're hurting my mommy," the little girl choked out. "I think she's dying." The words hit Clara with the force of a physical blow, a shock wave that obliterated the quiet discipline of her new existence. In that single, heart-stopping instant, 5 years of practiced invisibility evaporated like mist in a harsh sun. The maid was gone. The ranger was back. "Stay behind me," Clara said, her voice a low, steady rumble that seemed to cut through the child's raw fear. It was a voice she hadn't used in a very long time, a voice of command and unshakable calm. She didn't wait for an answer. She gently guided the trembling child behind the bulk of her industrial cleaning cart, a makeshift shield of plastic and steel, and then she pushed the heavy penthouse door inward. The scene inside was a grotesque collision of opulence and brutality. Sprawled across a vast office that offered a breathtaking, glittering panorama of the Chicago skyline and the dark expanse of Lake Michigan, 4 large men in dark, expensive suits were cornering a woman. Eleanor Croft. Clara recognized her instantly from the corporate photos that adorned the lobby, a formidable presence even in a 2-dimensional image. She was on her feet, but just barely. A nasty cut bled freely from a gash above her eye, staining her temple and cheek with a crimson smear. Her lip was split, and a dark bruise was already beginning to bloom on her jaw. She fought with the desperate ferocity of a cornered lioness, her movements sharp and defiant, but she was clearly exhausted, outmatched, and her attackers were closing in with the unhurried professional confidence of predators who knew their prey was trapped. One of them, the largest, held a thin black cord stretched taut between his hands. Clara moved without a sound, a phantom gliding across the plush, deep-pile carpet. The first man, the one closest to the door, never saw her coming. Clara's hand shot out, her fingers like steel talons, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it in a way nature had never intended. A sharp, sickening snap echoed in the cavernous room as the bones in his forearm gave way. Clara used the man's own forward momentum to spin him around, transforming him into a human shield between her and the others. She then drove him, face first, into the paneled wall with a dull, wet thud. He crumpled to the thick, expensive carpet without a sound, a discarded heap of broken limbs and unconsciousness. The other three turned, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. A maid. A cleaning lady. Their momentary confusion was all the opening Clara needed. She surged forward, a blur of controlled, violent motion. The second man, recovering first, swung a clumsy, powerful punch meant to crush bone. Clara sidestepped it effortlessly, the blow whistling past her ear. Her hand, hardened from years of training, chopped down on the man's collarbone. The bone gave way with a sickening crack, and the man went down, howling in agony, clutching his shattered shoulder. The third attacker was more cautious, his eyes narrowed with a flicker of professional appraisal. He pulled a small, weighted sap from the inside pocket of his jacket, but he was far too slow. Clara closed the distance in a heartbeat, her foot sweeping his legs out from under him in a perfectly executed takedown. As he fell backward, his head vulnerable, Clara delivered a precise, calculated strike to the side of his neck with the heel of her hand. The man's eyes rolled back into his head, and he was unconscious before he hit the ground. The last man, clearly the leader and the one who had been holding the cord, backed away slowly, his face a mask of disbelief and incandescent fury. He reached inside his jacket, his hand going for a weapon Clara knew she couldn't let him draw. She was on him in 2 quick strides. She grabbed his arm, her grip like a vice, arresting the draw. With her other hand, she slammed her palm up under his nose, driving the cartilage back into his sinuses with a crunching sound. The man staggered back, his eyes watering, his senses reeling from the blinding pain. Clara followed, hooking her leg behind his and driving him backward over a low-slung leather sofa. The man's head hit the marble floor on the other side with a dull, final thud that seemed to echo in the sudden, profound silence. Silence descended upon the room, broken only by the ragged, desperate sound of Eleanor Croft's breathing. She stared at Clara, her one good eye wide with utter astonishment, before her knees finally buckled, her body giving up the fight it had so valiantly sustained. Clara crossed the room in an instant, catching her before she could hit the floor. Her combat training shifted seamlessly from offense to triage, the warrior giving way to the medic. She swept Eleanor into her arms, she was lighter than she looked, and carried her to the sofa, laying her down as gently as she could. The combat medic took over now, her hands moving with a practiced, impersonal calm that belied the adrenaline still singing in her veins. "My daughter," Eleanor rasped, her voice a raw, broken whisper. "Lily." "She's safe," Clara said, her tone reassuring but firm, designed to cut through panic. "She's with me." Her fingers went to Eleanor's neck, checking her pulse. It was thready, too fast. She tilted Eleanor's head back gently, ensuring her airway was clear. She lifted an eyelid. The pupils were unequal, a clear and dangerous sign of a concussion. She ran her hands over Eleanor's skull, feeling for fractures or depressions, her touch both professional and surprisingly gentle. She saw the deep, ugly bruising on her ribs where they had struck her, methodical and brutal. "Can you tell me your name?" she asked, keeping her voice level and calm, a standard field assessment question. "Eleanor." "Croft," she managed, her breath catching in a pained gasp. "Good, Eleanor. You have a serious concussion and possibly some cracked ribs. I need to get you out of here." Clara's eyes swept the room again, taking in the details. She saw the discarded cord on the floor. She saw the heavy, methodical nature of the bruises. This wasn't a simple robbery or a random act of violence. This was a professional, targeted assault. Calling building security or even 911 was a gamble she couldn't afford to take. The kind of people who sent these men would have eyes and ears everywhere. They would be expecting an official response. Sirens, police reports, paramedics. They wouldn't be expecting a cleaning lady to walk her out the back door. She stood and walked back to the office entrance. Lily was peeking around the edge of the cleaning cart, her small face streaked with tears, her eyes enormous in her pale face. Clara knelt down, bringing herself to the child's level, making herself smaller, less threatening. "It's okay now," she said softly. "Those men can't hurt your mom anymore. But we have to be very, very quiet. We're going to play a game. It's called the quiet game. Can you do that for me? Can you be a super secret spy?" Lily nodded, her eyes fixed on Clara's face, a fragile, desperate trust forming in their depths. "Good girl," Clara returned to Eleanor, who was struggling to stay conscious, her eyelids fluttering. "I'm getting you out of here," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "It's the only way." "Where?" Eleanor whispered, her consciousness fading, the world dissolving into a gray fog. "Someplace safe." Clara slid her arms beneath her, one under her knees, the other supporting her back. Eleanor gave a soft moan of pain as she was lifted, but didn't protest. Clara looked around the opulent office one last time, at the 4 unconscious men scattered amongst the symbols of immense wealth and power, the polished mahogany, the original artwork, the panoramic view of a city that now felt like a cage. 5 years. 5 years she had worked so hard to leave this world of violence behind, to build a quiet, safe life for her own daughter. And in the space of 5 minutes, it was all undone. She walked to the door, Eleanor held securely in her arms. Lily followed close behind, her small hand clutching the back of Clara's gray work pants like a lifeline. Clara's knowledge of this building wasn't of boardrooms and stock prices, but of service elevators, forgotten stairwells, and the labyrinthine corridors of the sub-basement. Her past had taught her how to fight and how to heal. Her present was about to give them a way to escape. She would take them to the only place she knew was truly secure. She would take them home. The service elevator whined in the echoing silence of the concrete shaft, its slow, juddering descent a stark contrast to the frantic, hammering beat of Clara's heart. She held Eleanor securely, her head resting against Clara's shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady for now. Beside her, Lily clutched a fistful of her gray work pants, her small knuckles white. Her eyes, wide and dark, darted around the bare metal walls of the elevator, taking in the strange, hidden world that existed beneath the polished one she knew. "It's okay," Clara murmured, her voice barely disturbing the industrial quiet. "This is my secret passageway. Not many people know about it." Lily looked up at her, a flicker of childish awe replacing some of the fear in her eyes. She nodded, accepting Clara's words with the simple, uncomplicated faith of a child in the presence of a capable adult. The elevator shuddered to a halt in the sub-basement. The air here was cool and smelled of damp concrete, ozone, and motor oil. Clara shifted Eleanor's weight, her head cocked, listening intently to the sounds of the building's great, beating heart. She could hear the distant, powerful hum of the main generators and the faint, rhythmic clank of a pipe somewhere deep in the labyrinth. There were no voices, no footsteps. For the moment, they were alone. She moved with a quiet, purposeful stride through the maze of corridors, following a path she had walked 1,000 times with a mop and bucket. Her maid's key card, a simple tool of her invisible trade, now became the key to their freedom, granting her access through a series of locked maintenance doors. Each one clicked open and shut behind them, taking them further from the opulent lobby and closer to the anonymity of the loading docks. They paused once, flattening themselves into a dark, dusty alcove, as the crackle of a security guard's radio echoed from an intersecting hallway. Clara held her breath, shielding the mother and child with her own body, until the footsteps and the tinny voice faded away into the distance. She felt Lily tremble against her leg, and she placed a calming hand on her head, a silent reassurance. Finally, a heavy steel door, streaked with rust, led them out into the chilled night air of a deserted alley. The sudden wash of sodium vapor streetlights felt like a spotlight, harsh and unwelcome after the comforting darkness. Clara's old station wagon, a dented but reliable vehicle that had seen better days, was parked in its designated employee spot at the far end of the lot. It was an ugly, unassuming car, the perfect camouflage in a city of gleaming luxury sedans. She gently placed Eleanor in the passenger seat, buckling her in carefully before lifting a wide-eyed Lily onto the bench seat in the back. The drive from the glittering towers of the Loop to her working-class neighborhood on the south side was a journey across worlds. The gleaming glass and steel facades of corporate power gave way to gritty, brick-faced apartment buildings and the warm, scattered lights of corner bodegas. Eleanor remained unconscious, oblivious to the jarring transition from her world to Clara's. Clara's apartment was on the third floor of a modest walk-up. The hallway was narrow and smelled faintly of his neighbor's cooking. Garlic and onions from one door, cinnamon and cumin from another. She balanced Eleanor against her hip with one arm while fumbling for her keys, the weight of the woman, the child, and the entire world seeming to rest on her shoulders. She pushed the door open to a scene of comforting, mundane domesticity. The living room was small but tidy, dominated by a large, overflowing bookshelf and a comfortable-looking, slightly worn armchair. The television was playing a cartoon at a low volume. Her 9-year-old daughter, Sophie, was sitting on the floor, showing a picture book to Mrs. Peterson, their elderly, kind-hearted babysitter. They both looked up as she entered. Mrs. Peterson's warm, wrinkled smile faltered, replaced by a sharp gasp of shock. Sophie's eyes grew wide as she saw the unconscious woman in her mother's arms and the terrified little girl hiding behind her. "Clara! My heavens! What happened?" Mrs. Peterson exclaimed, rising to her feet with a worried creak of her joints. "There was an accident at work," Clara said, her voice calm and even, betraying none of the adrenaline still coursing through her system. She carried Eleanor past them, down the short hallway to her own bedroom. "She fell. She needs help." She laid Eleanor down on her bed, the simple, hand-stitched quilt a stark contrast to the expensive silk of her blouse. Sophie had crept to the doorway of the living room, her expression a mixture of fear and deep concern. "Mommy, is she okay?" Clara came back and knelt in front of her daughter, placing her hands on her small shoulders. "She's hurt, sweetie, but she's going to be okay. I need you to be a big girl for me right now. Can you do that?" Sophie nodded solemnly, her eyes serious. "This is Lily," Clara said, gently guiding the other girl forward from behind her legs. "She's very scared. I need you to help me look after her." Sophie's gaze softened as she looked at the younger girl. She gave Lily a small, shy smile and held out her hand. "Hi, Lily. I'm Sophie. Do you want to see my drawings?" Lily hesitated for just a moment, her eyes darting from Sophie's outstretched hand to Clara's reassuring face. Then she let go of Clara's pants and took Sophie's hand. Clara turned to Mrs. Peterson, pulling her worn wallet from her back pocket. "Thank you for staying late, Martha. I'm so sorry to rush you out." She pressed twice her usual payment into the woman's soft, wrinkled hand. "But Clara, should we call an ambulance?" she whispered, her eyes full of concern, darting toward the bedroom. "No," Clara said firmly. "I've already checked her over. I have some training. A hospital is the last thing she needs right now. Please, Martha." I can handle this. I just need you to go home and not mention this to anyone. It's very important." Mrs. Peterson looked from Clara's steady, serious face to the two little girls who were now sitting side by side on the rug, Sophie pointing to a colorful drawing of a unicorn. She had known Clara since Sophie was a toddler. She trusted her implicitly. She gave a slow, reluctant nod. "All right, dear. If you're sure. You call me if you need anything. Anything at all." After she left, Clara locked the door, sliding the deadbolt and chain into place. The sound echoed with a grim finality in the quiet apartment. She retrieved a large, professional-grade medical kit from the back of her closet, a ghost from her old life she had hoped never to open again, and returned to the bedroom. She worked under the soft glow of a bedside lamp, cleaning and dressing the cut on Eleanor's forehead with practiced efficiency. She checked her ribs, relieved to find them badly bruised, but not broken. The concussion was her main concern. She carefully monitored Eleanor's breathing and pulse, her focus absolute, the world outside this small room ceasing to exist. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice Eleanor's eyelids flutter open. Her vision was blurry, swimming in and out of focus. She saw the unfamiliar pattern of a textured ceiling, the soft, yellow light. A woman was leaning over her, her touch surprisingly gentle as she taped a bandage to her head. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She tried to push herself up, a strangled cry escaping her lips. Clara's hands came up, open and pacifying. "Easy. You're safe. Just lie still." Her unfocused eyes tried to place the woman, the cheap plaid shirt, the worn lines of fatigue on her face, the quiet authority in her voice. This wasn't a doctor. This wasn't a hospital. The last thing she remembered was pain, the suffocating feeling of being overwhelmed, and the face of one of the men snarling at her as he produced the cord. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. "Who are you?" Clara's calm voice cut through the thick fog of Eleanor's panic like a beacon. "Easy. You're safe. Just lie still." Her eyes, still struggling to focus, took in the details of the room around her. It was simple, almost sparse. A worn wooden dresser stood against one wall, a framed photo of a smiling man and a little girl perched on top. The curtains were a plain, faded blue. This wasn't a hospital. It certainly wasn't her home. The terror returned, sharp and suffocating, making it hard to breathe. "Who are you?" she repeated, her voice a raw whisper. She tried to sit up again, but a wave of vertigo sent the room spinning, and a sharp, lancing pain shot through her ribs, forcing a gasp from her lips. "My name is Clara Vance," the woman said, gently placing a hand on her shoulder to keep her from rising. "I work at your building, on the cleaning crew. Your daughter, she came and got me." The words seemed to hang in the air, nonsensical and fragmented. Her daughter. Lily. The memory crashed back into her with the force of a physical blow. The office, the men, their cold, dead eyes, the brutal, shocking pain. Lily's scream. "Lily!" she gasped, her heart seizing with a fresh wave of terror. "Where is my daughter? Is she all right?" "She's right here. She's safe," Clara assured her. She turned her head toward the door. "Sophie, can you bring Lily in here for a minute?" A moment later, two small figures appeared in the doorway. Sophie, a serious-eyed girl who was a miniature version of her mother, stood slightly in front, holding Lily's hand. Lily herself looked small and lost in the unfamiliar hallway, but she was unharmed. Her eyes lit up with pure, unadulterated relief when she saw her mother was awake. "Mommy!" She rushed to the bedside, breaking free from Sophie's grasp. "Oh, baby," Eleanor breathed, tears of relief blurring her already hazy vision. She reached out, her hand trembling, and brushed Lily's hair back from her forehead. Seeing her child, whole and unhurt, was the only thing that mattered. It was an anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. It was the first thing that made her believe she might actually be safe. She looked from her daughter's precious face to the woman standing calmly by the bed, Clara Vance, the cleaner. She had seen her before, she realized now, a fleeting presence in the hallways late at night when she was working. A woman in a gray uniform, head down, pushing a cart. Someone she had never given a second thought. Another invisible cog in the great machine of her empire. Now, the memory of this woman moving through her office, a silent, brutally efficient force of nature, clashed jarringly with the image of the quiet, gentle mother in this humble apartment. You saved us," she said, the realization dawning with the weight of a fundamental truth. "I did what anyone would have," Clara deflected, her gaze steady and unwavering. "No," Eleanor said, her voice gaining a sliver of its usual strength and certainty. "No, they don't." She looked down at her bandaged hands, at the dull, spreading ache that permeated her entire body. "Why didn't you call the police? An ambulance?" "Because the men who attacked you weren't common criminals," Clara said simply, her voice low so the children, who were now sitting at the foot of the bed, wouldn't overhear. "They were professionals. People like that don't work for someone who can't control the aftermath. Calling 911 would have been like sending up a flare. They'd have known exactly where you were. This way, you just vanished." The cold, calculated logic of her words settled over Eleanor like a shroud. She was right. Whoever had sent them would be monitoring official channels. They would be expecting a frantic call, a police report, a hospital admission. They would not be expecting her to disappear into the Chicago night with a member of the cleaning staff. The thought was both terrifying and, in its own way, brilliant. For the first time since waking up, Eleanor truly looked at her surroundings. She saw the worn but clean furniture, the neatly stacked books on the nightstand, the faint, clean smell of bleach and something warm, like cinnamon, that seemed to cling to the air. She saw the way Clara's daughter, Sophie, sat with Lily on the floor, showing her a doll with a quiet, gentle patience that was profoundly touching. This was a home, a sanctuary built not of wealth and prestige, but of something far more valuable. "I need to make a call," she said, the CEO in her reasserting itself, grasping for a familiar tool of control. "My head of security. My lawyer." "Your phone was smashed in the attack," Clara interrupted gently. "And even if it wasn't, using it would be the first thing they'd track. You have to assume they can access your call logs, your location, everything. For now, you're a ghost. It's the only thing keeping you and your daughter safe." The feeling of utter helplessness was foreign to Eleanor, and she hated it. Her entire life was built on control, on having the resources and the power to solve any problem that arose. Now she had nothing. She was injured, trapped in a stranger's apartment, her life and her child's life entirely dependent on the very woman she would have overlooked yesterday. Clara seemed to read the conflict on her face. She left the room and returned a moment later with a glass of water and 2 pills. "For the pain," she said, placing them on the bedside table. "You have a severe concussion, Eleanor, and badly bruised ribs. You need to rest." The sound of her first name from this woman's lips felt strangely intimate, yet her tone was nothing but professional. She was a medic, tending to a patient. Eleanor watched her hands as she adjusted the pillow behind her back. They were strong, calloused hands, but their movements were deft and sure. There was a confidence in her, a stillness that Eleanor had only ever seen in the most disciplined and powerful men. But her power wasn't loud or boastful. It was a quiet, unshakable core of competence. She lay back, the bone-deep exhaustion washing over her in waves. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the events that had led her here. The argument on the phone just before, the sudden violent entry of the men, their cold, determined faces. They weren't there to rob her. They were there for her. And there was only one person in the world with the resources and the utter, monstrous ruthlessness to order an attack like that. One person who had been trying to control her for months, whose proposals had become more like threats with each refusal. Julian Thorne, she whispered, the name tasting like poison on her tongue. Clara, who had been quietly watching her from the doorway, gave a single, slow nod. The name clearly meant nothing to her, but the look of pure venom on Eleanor's face told her everything she needed to know. She had just identified the monster in the dark. "He won't stop," Eleanor said, a new wave of fear washing over her, colder and more profound than the physical pain. "He's not just going to let me disappear. He will hunt me down." "Let him hunt," Clara said, her voice a low, steady anchor in Eleanor's storm. "He's looking for a CEO. He won't think to look for her in a cleaner's apartment." Eleanor awoke to the unfamiliar but comforting smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was in a hotel, a comforting delusion that shattered the instant she tried to move. A chorus of aches answered, a painful symphony reminding her of everything. She wasn't in a hotel. She was in a third-floor walk-up in a part of Chicago she'd only ever seen from a distance, a fugitive in her own city. She pushed herself up slowly, her head pounding a dull, rhythmic beat against her skull. The simple plaid shirt she'd seen on Clara last night was draped over a chair, and a clean folded t-shirt and a pair of gray sweatpants were left at the foot of the bed. They were worn, but soft, a quiet offering of comfort and dignity. After changing, her movements stiff and painful, she followed the sounds of quiet activity into the living room. The scene that greeted her was one of surreal domesticity. Clara stood at the small stove in the adjoining kitchenette, flipping pancakes with an easy, practiced motion. At the small dining table, Sophie was patiently showing Lily how to draw a horse, her brow furrowed in concentration. Lily, for her part, was completely absorbed, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time since the ordeal began. The morning sunlight streamed through the single large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting a warm, hopeful glow over the entire scene. It was an island of peace in a sea of terror. "Good morning," Clara said, not turning around. She had heard her approach. Of course, she had. The woman seemed to notice everything. "There's coffee, and breakfast will be ready in a minute." Eleanor murmured her thanks, feeling like an intruder in this intimate space. She poured herself a mug of coffee, the warmth a welcome comfort in her hands. She watched Clara move around the small kitchen, her efficiency just as palpable here as it had been in her office dispatching trained thugs. She was a woman comfortable in her own skin, in her own space, a master of her small domain. She brought a plate of pancakes to the table for her. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was hit by a truck," Eleanor answered honestly. "But better." She paused, her eyes drifting to the girls who were now giggling over a lopsided drawing. "Thank you for everything. She seems okay." "Kids are resilient," Clara said, sitting down across from her with her own plate. "And Sophie is a good big sister." A comfortable silence settled between them as they ate, the only sounds the soft clinking of forks and the quiet chatter of the children. It was Eleanor who finally broke it. the question that had been burning in her mind since she'd witnessed the impossible. "You said you had some training," she began, choosing her words carefully. "That wasn't some training, Clara. What you did last night. Who are you?" Clara took a slow sip of her coffee, her gaze distant for a moment, as if looking back across a vast, unbridgeable gulf of time. "A long time ago, I was an Army Ranger," she said, her voice flat, matter-of-fact. "A combat medic. I spent 10 years in places most people only see on the news." The confession landed with a quiet thud, yet it explained everything. The calm under fire, the tactical precision, the medical knowledge, the quiet, dangerous competence that radiated from her like a low heat. "What happened?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft. "Why are you—" She trailed off, not wanting to sound insulting. "My husband, Michael," Clara said, her eyes flicking to the framed photo on the dresser. "He got sick. A rare kind of cancer that moved fast. I came home on compassionate leave, and I spent every last minute I could with him. After he passed, the old job, it didn't make sense anymore. Sophie needed a mother, not a ghost who called once a month from halfway around the world. So, I chose this. It's quiet, it pays the bills, and I'm here to pick her up from school every day. That's all that matters now." Her simple, powerful declaration of love for her daughter struck a chord deep within Eleanor. Her own life was a whirlwind of board meetings, international flights, and shareholder calls. She had nannies, drivers, tutors, an entire staff to manage Lily's life because she was so rarely present herself. In that moment, sitting in a cramped kitchenette in a part of the city she couldn't even name, she felt a pang of something that felt dangerously close to envy for this woman's simple, purposeful life. She told her then about Julian Thorne, about his relentless corporate pursuit that had morphed into a personal obsession. She described his cold ambition, his vast resources, and his absolute refusal to take no for an answer. She explained how his obsession had escalated from hostile business tactics to this monstrous act of violence. As she spoke, Clara's expression remained unreadable, but a muscle in her jaw tightened. "So, he thinks he can break you," Clara summarized, her voice low and hard. "Force you to give him what he wants." "It's all he's ever known," Eleanor said bitterly. "Taking what he wants, one way or another." After breakfast, Clara turned on the small television to a local news channel, keeping the volume low. As the girls played on the floor with a set of building blocks, she and Eleanor watched. 20 minutes into the broadcast, a news anchor gave a brief, dismissive report. An incident at the Croft Enterprises tower overnight is being attributed to a major electrical fault in the upper floors. The building was briefly evacuated, but officials report the situation is now under control. Croft Enterprises has not yet released an official statement. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. An electrical fault. Julian was already rewriting history, erasing the attack, burying the truth under a mountain of plausible, boring lies. It was a terrifyingly casual display of his influence. "He controls the narrative," she whispered, her voice tight. "He's making it so what happened to me never even happened." As if on cue, the landline phone on the wall jangled, a harsh, intrusive sound in the quiet apartment. Clara's body went still. She looked at the phone, then at Eleanor. She hadn't used that line for anything other than telemarketers in months. She picked up the receiver, her eyes watchful. "Hello," she said, her voice neutral. There was a brief pause on the other end, just long enough to be unnerving. Then a smooth, cold voice spoke. "Is a Mr. Henderson there?" "No," Clara replied, her voice level, betraying nothing. "You have the wrong number." "My apologies," the voice said, and the line went dead. Clara slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. She didn't need to explain. Eleanor understood instantly. It was a probing call, a test. They had her name from the employee files. They had her address. And now they had her number. They were casting their net, and the first lines had just brushed against their sanctuary. Clara walked to the window, peering cautiously through a narrow slit in the blinds. Across the street, a black sedan was parked. It wasn't flashy, but it was out of place in her neighborhood of aging family cars and battered work vans. Two men sat inside, their faces obscured by the tinted glass, but their purpose was unmistakable. They were watching. Clara stepped back from the window, the quiet calm in her demeanor replaced by a hardened, diamond-sharp focus. The sanctuary was breached. Their time here was over. "They found us," Eleanor stated, her voice trembling slightly. "They found the cleaner," Clara corrected, her voice dangerously quiet. "They have no idea who they're dealing with." She glanced at their daughters, playing peacefully on the floor, completely unaware of the wolves circling outside. "Not yet." She turned to Eleanor, the time for talk over. "Pack a bag. We're leaving." There was no time for debate, no room for the fear that was threatening to paralyze Eleanor. Clara moved with an urgency that was both terrifying and deeply reassuring. "Sophie, pack your school bag," she commanded gently but firmly. "Your favorite book, your drawing pad, and the warmest sweater you have. Nothing else." She then turned to Eleanor. "There's a small duffel bag in my closet. Put anything you can find for you and Lily in it. You have 5 minutes." While they scrambled to follow her orders, their movements clumsy with panic, Clara worked. She took a cheap, prepaid burner phone from a drawer, a relic of a past she had never truly shed, and dialed a local pizza place. She ordered 2 large pepperoni pizzas to her address, giving her apartment number clearly, and asking for the driver to call her from the lobby when he arrived. It was a simple, classic diversion. The men in the sedan would be watching the front entrance, waiting for a delivery boy, expecting the ordinary. They would never be looking at the rusty, seldom-used fire escape at the back of the building. From a locked footlocker under her bed, she pulled a tightly packed canvas bag, her go-bag. It was heavy with essentials she hadn't needed in 5 years, but had never discarded. Cash, a multi-tool, a high-powered flashlight, a water purification kit, and a far more comprehensive medical kit than the one she kept in the closet. The sight of it was like seeing a ghost of the woman she once was. "Time to go," she said, her voice low and urgent. The apartment's back window, located in the small kitchen, led to the fire escape. It overlooked a dingy alleyway filled with overflowing dumpsters and the detritus of urban life. It was a 3-story drop down a series of narrow, rickety metal stairs. Lily whimpered at the sight of it, her small hands clutching Eleanor's leg. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head, her eyes wide with fear. Eleanor knelt, her own fear masked by a sudden, fierce maternal calm. "Yes, you can, sweetie. It's a game, a secret mission. We have to be spies and not let the bad guys see us." Clara was already out on the platform, her footing sure and steady on the groaning metal. She turned and held her arms out for Lily. "I've got you," she said, her voice a steady, unbreakable promise. "I will not let you fall." After a moment of hesitation, Lily let her mother guide her into Clara's strong arms. Clara held her securely against her chest and started down the steps, moving with a fluid, practiced grace that defied the awkwardness of her burden. Eleanor handed her the duffel bag and then helped Sophie, who was trying her best to be brave, through the window. Eleanor was last, her movements clumsy from her injuries, her heart pounding with a mixture of pain and adrenaline. Her foot slipped on a patch of wet, rusty metal, and she let out a small cry. Clara's hand was instantly there, her grip like iron on her arm, steadying her. For a heartbeat, their eyes met in the dim light of the alley. A shared moment of fear, trust, and a sudden, stark reliance. They reached the bottom just as they heard the pizza delivery guy buzzing the front door of the building. A perfect distraction. Clara led them through a maze of back alleys she knew as well as the hallways of Eleanor's tower. Each turn took them further from the watched street, deeper into the city's anonymous arteries. They boarded a city bus, 4 quiet shadows amidst the late-night commuters, and rode it 10 stops before getting off and melting into another neighborhood. An hour later, they stood before a locked, graffiti-covered garage door in a gritty industrial area. Clara keyed in a code on a rusted keypad, and the door rumbled open, revealing not a car, but a dusty, powerful-looking motorcycle with a sidecar attached. "It's not ideal," Clara said, anticipating Eleanor's question. "But it's not registered to me, and it's the last thing they'll be looking for." Sophie, surprisingly, beamed. "Wow, Mommy!" The ride was cold and loud. Clara drove the motorcycle with an expert's confidence. Eleanor sat behind her, her arms wrapped around Clara's waist for stability, a position of startling intimacy born of pure necessity. The 2 girls huddled together under a thick blanket in the sidecar, their heads tucked down against the biting wind. They drove for 2 hours, leaving the city lights of Chicago far behind, climbing into the dark pine-covered hills that bordered the state of Wisconsin. Finally, they turned down a long, unpaved road, the motorcycle's single headlight cutting a lone, bouncing path through the dense forest. They came to a stop before a small, rustic cabin, barely visible in the overwhelming darkness. It was utterly isolated, a fortress of solitude. "My husband's grandfather built this place," Clara explained, her voice softer now, tinged with memory. "We used to come up here to get away from everything." Inside, the cabin was one large room with a massive stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a sleeping loft. It was filled with the ghosts of a happy life. Faded photographs on the mantelpiece, a stack of old board games, a handmade rocking chair. It was the complete opposite of Eleanor's cold, minimalist penthouse. This was a home built of love, not just wood and stone. The exhaustion of the last 24 hours hit them all at once. The girls, worn out from fear and travel, fell asleep almost instantly on the bunk beds in the loft. The adrenaline finally drained from Eleanor's body, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary ache. She stood by the large picture window, looking out at the black, impenetrable wall of trees. Clara came to stand beside her, a respectful distance between them. The only sound was the gentle crackle of the fire she had just started in the hearth. They were safe, for now. A tiny island of warmth and light in an ocean of darkness. "We can't run forever, Clara," Eleanor said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. The raw fear was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. She was done being a victim. "What do we do now?" Clara's gaze followed Eleanor's out the window into the vast, silent darkness of the Wisconsin forest. Her question, "What do we do now?" hung in the air between them, both a challenge and a plea. For the first time since this ordeal began, Clara saw the CEO re-emerge in Eleanor. It wasn't in the form of demands or arrogance, but as a cool, analytical mind, ready to face an overwhelming problem head-on. "First," Clara said, turning from the window, her voice dropping into the quiet, authoritative tone of a mission briefing, "we make sure we're secure." She spent the next hour moving through the small cabin with a methodical purpose that Eleanor found both fascinating and deeply calming. She checked the locks on the heavy wooden door and the single large window, wedging a small piece of wood into the frame of the window to prevent it from being slid open from the outside. She walked the perimeter outside, her dark form disappearing into the trees, returning minutes later with a concise report. "One road in, and we can see it from the loft window for half a mile. No close neighbors. The forest is too thick for an easy approach on foot. For now, this is a good position." She was no longer a cleaner, nor just a mother. She was a protector, surveying her territory, assessing threats and vulnerabilities. She returned to the fireplace where Eleanor stood, the warmth of the flames doing little to chase away her internal chill. "Now, your turn," she said, her eyes serious. "Tell me about this man, Julian Thorne. Not the businessman, the man. What are his weaknesses?" The question shifted the dynamic between them. Clara was deferring to Eleanor's expertise, to her battlefield. For the next hour, Eleanor laid out the architecture of her enemy. Julian was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly amoral. But his greatest strength, she explained, was also his greatest weakness, his monumental ego. "He's a narcissist," Eleanor explained, pacing in front of the crackling fire, the restless energy a familiar part of her thought process. "He needs to be seen as a titan, a visionary. His public image is everything to him. He's spent a fortune cultivating it. He buys respectability, sits on charity boards, endows university wings. It's all a performance, a carefully constructed facade. Teeth. So the one thing he can't afford is a public scandal," Clara concluded, grasping the strategic implication immediately. "Especially not one involving a violent assault on a business rival and an attempted forced merger that looks more like a kidnapping," Eleanor agreed, a hard, sharp edge to her voice. "If I could prove what he did, I could ruin him. But it's my word against his. And my word is currently coming from a ghost he's already erased." They needed an ally, someone on the outside, someone utterly incorruptible and completely loyal. Not her corporate lawyer, who was brilliant, but part of the system Julian could manipulate. Not her head of security, who was good, but whose team could have a weak link, a source that could be bought. "Arthur Finch," Eleanor said suddenly, the name surfacing from her memory like a lifeline. "He was my father's lawyer, my mentor. He's retired now, lives up in the mountains himself, in Colorado. He's 75, sharp as a razor, and he despises men like Julian with a passion. If there's one person I can trust with my life, it's him." The problem was contacting him without leaving a digital trail. Clara retrieved her go-bag and produced one of the burner phones. "This is our one shot," she said, her tone grim. "We make the call, we keep it under 30 seconds, and then this phone becomes a paperweight. Anyone trying to trace it will only get a ping off a cell tower 10 miles from here. By the time they get a team there, the trail will be ice cold." As she prepared the phone, Eleanor's gaze fell on the mantelpiece. She picked up the framed photo she had noticed earlier. It was of a younger Clara, not in uniform, but in a simple T-shirt, her arm wrapped around a man with a warm, infectious smile. Sophie, a toddler at the time, sat on his shoulders. They were all laughing, their heads thrown back in a moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness. "Your husband?" Eleanor asked softly. Clara glanced at the photo, and the hard, disciplined lines on her face softened for a fraction of a second. "That's Michael. We were hiking near here." "He's handsome," Eleanor said, her voice catching slightly. She felt like she was trespassing on sacred ground. This cabin was their sanctuary, filled with a love she had only read about. The contrast with her own life, a calculated marriage that had ended in a sterile, amicable divorce, and now this monstrous courtship from Julian, was a physical ache in her chest. He was, Clara said simply. The finality of that one word held a universe of pain and loss. She must have swayed on her feet, a wave of dizziness from her concussion choosing that moment to hit. Clara was instantly at her side, her hand securely on her arm, guiding her to the handmade rocking chair by the fire. "You need to rest, Eleanor. You're pushing yourself too hard." "I don't have time to rest," she argued, though her body betrayed her with a weary slump into the chair. Clara knelt in front of her, her expression serious. "You're no good to Lily if you collapse." Her gaze was intense, and for the first time, Eleanor saw something beyond the soldier and the mother. She saw the woman, a woman who understood loss and was fighting fiercely to prevent another one. Her hand was still on Eleanor's arm, a point of solid, grounding warmth. The simple, unadorned intimacy of the gesture, of his genuine concern, was more potent than any flattery she had ever received. She pulled back slightly, flustered by her own reaction, and nodded. "You're right." They made the call. Clara dialed the number Eleanor gave her from memory. It rang 3 times before a gravelly, impatient voice answered. "Finch. Arthur, it's Eleanor." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Eleanor! Good God, the news! They're saying you've taken a leave of absence, that you're unreachable. I knew it was a lie. Are you all right?" "I'm safe, for now," she said, speaking quickly, aware of Clara's hand signal to keep it short. "Listen to me. It was Julian Thorne. He sent men. I have my daughter with me, and we are in hiding. I need your help. I need you to start digging. Quietly. Look into his import records, his holding companies, anything that doesn't look right. He's hiding something, Arthur. Find it. Consider it done," he said without hesitation. "Where are you? How can I help?" "You can't. Not yet. Don't try to find me. It's not safe. I'll contact you again in 2 days. Same time. Be careful, Eleanor." Arthur's voice was grave. "I will," she said, and gave Clara the nod. Clara ended the call immediately, popped the back off the phone, and snapped the SIM card in half. She then broke the phone itself over her knee and tossed the pieces into the fire. The plastic sizzled and melted, their only link to the outside world gone. A fragile sense of victory settled in the room. They had taken their first step. They had started to fight back. Eleanor looked at Clara, the firelight flickering across her resolute face. "Thank you," she said, the words carrying a weight far beyond simple gratitude. Clara simply nodded, her eyes on the fire. But as the last of the phone disappeared into the flames, a low, rhythmic sound began to break the profound silence of the forest. Faint at first, then growing steadily louder. Thump, 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 thump. Clara was on her feet in an instant, her body tense as a drawn bowstring, her gaze snapping toward the window. The sound was unmistakable. It was the sound of a helicopter, flying low and fast, sweeping through the mountains, and it was heading their way. The low, rhythmic thumping of the helicopter blades grew from a distant, ominous pulse to a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very logs of the cabin. Hope died in an instant, replaced by the cold, metallic taste of pure fear. "Kill the fire!" Clara snapped, her voice a blade cutting through the noise. She grabbed a bucket of water from the hearth, meant for stray embers, and upended it over the cheerful, crackling flames. The fire hissed violently, protesting its own demise, plunging the room into a thick, acrid smoke and near total darkness. The only light now came from the dying red embers that glowed like malevolent eyes in the hearth. "Eleanor, get the girls. Keep them in the center of the room, away from the windows." Eleanor didn't question her. She flew up the ladder to the loft where the terrifying noise had already woken the children. Sophie was sitting bolt upright, her eyes wide with fear, while Lily was curled into a tight ball, whimpering. Eleanor gathered them both into her arms, her body a protective shield, and guided them down into the main room, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "What's happening?" Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. "It's just a loud airplane, sweetie," Eleanor lied, her voice miraculously steady. "It will be gone in a minute." Clara was a shadow moving against the faint moonlight that filtered through the windows. She pulled the heavy curtains shut, sealing them in an almost complete blackness. The helicopter was nearly on top of them now, the thumping so loud it felt like a giant fist pounding on the roof, on their chests. Then, a brilliant, terrifying white light cut through the night. A searchlight. It sliced through the treetops, turning the familiar, comforting forest into a stark, alien landscape of black and white. Clara pulled them all down to the floor, covering the girls' heads with her own body, as if she could absorb any danger herself. Eleanor huddled beside them, her arm thrown over her daughter, her breath held tight in her chest. The beam swept past the cabin, momentarily illuminating a gap in the curtains and painting a blinding stripe of white across the floor before moving on. The sound was deafening, the vibrations rattling the dishes in the kitchen cabinets. They were being hunted from the sky. The power, the sheer audacity of it was terrifying. This was what Julian Thorne's wealth could buy. A private army, a helicopter, the ability to scour a mountain range in the dead of night, as if looking for a lost pet. For what felt like an eternity, the helicopter circled, its powerful light methodically sweeping the area. Eleanor could feel Lily trembling uncontrollably beneath her. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying to a God she hadn't spoken to in years. She prayed for the light to stay away, for the sound to stop. She prayed for the quiet cleaner who had become their only hope. Then, as slowly as it arrived, the sound began to recede. The thumping grew fainter, the searching light disappearing over the next ridge. They stayed on the floor, unmoving, until the helicopter was nothing more than a distant, fading pulse, finally swallowed completely by the vast silence of the forest. The quiet that returned was heavier, more menacing than before. "Are they gone?" Sophie whispered from under her mother's arm. Clara didn't move for a full minute, listening, her senses attuned to the night. Finally, she relaxed her body, though the tension never fully left her shoulders. "For now," she said. She rose and went to the window, peering through the smallest of gaps. The forest was dark and still once more. "The phone call," Eleanor breathed, the guilt of physical weight in her stomach. He traced the call. "Oh God, Clara, I'm so sorry. I led him right to us." "Stop," Clara said, her voice firm but not unkind as she turned from the window. "We both knew it was a risk. It was a move we had to make. We just underestimated his resources. His tech team is better than I thought." She came and knelt before the girls, who were now clinging to Eleanor. "That was the end of the game," she said softly. "You both did great. You were very brave spies." Her calm praise seemed to soothe them, their trembling subsiding slightly. She looked at Eleanor over their heads, her eyes communicating a clear, unspoken message. "The kids first. We panic later." Together they got the girls settled,